Hats off chain hit with $60 million proposed class action over alleged abuse. Trigger warning. There have been allegations against Hats Off such as physical abuse, emotional abuse, over-medicating children, suicidal ideation, human trafficking, and death. Cassidy Frank, Jamal Morrison, Tishana Burnett, and Dwayne Ferguson are all the victims mentioned in this video. Now's your chance to exit the video if some of those topics may be triggering to you. But if you're gonna stay, buckle up because it's a lot to unpack. The more research I did into Hats Off, the more disgusted I got with what I found. It just kept getting more and more disturbing. Some of these stories are so horrifying of what these children went through. I'm from Ontario and I didn't even know that these places existed. I feel like there needs to be more awareness brought to this, so this is why I'm making the video about it. Cassidy Frank, who now lives hours away from the group home life, she is surrounded by deer and beautiful sunsets. I think of it like a movie, she said in an interview with Global News. She still has a lot of trouble making sense of what happened. In the early months of 2021, Cassidy was living inside Hats Off group homes. She was 16 at this time. The group home was located on the outskirts of Hamilton, Ontario. She described the house as a hostile environment with physical restraint from staff members, few or no activities, and horrible food. She claims all the girls in the house were scared and felt like nobody cared about them. Shadia Yusuf, who was hired without training, offered Cassidy a place to stay in her ground floor apartment in downtown Hamilton, Ontario. Cassidy felt like she could trust Shadia because she was a worker at the group home. Since Cassidy was 16 at the time, she needed permission from a Hats Off supervisor and her children's aid worker, which they both granted. Cassidy's hopes were high as she was promised a job working with cars, and it was an escape from the group home life. Shadia brought Cassidy with her to her downtown apartment in Hamilton, which was on the ground floor. Cassidy felt like something was off minutes after arriving. Later on that day, Shadia brought Cassidy to a random apartment where an older man lived. The man hands Cassidy a baggie of cocaine, and Shadia demanded that Cassidy sells it for her, telling her, "Go get me $200. Later on that evening, Shadia, the group home worker who let Cassidy to live with her, was rushed to the hospital after ingesting too many magic mushrooms and was tripping out. Now that Cassidy was left alone in the apartment, she claimed that things were out of her control. Strange men would visit the apartment and start cooking crack cocaine and often warned her that she could be sold into sex slavery. She described the apartment as living in a drug den. You are so brave, and thank you for sharing your story. I hope you're healing from this, and I'm glad you're in a better place than you were before. Sending good vibes your way." The next victim is Jamar Morrison. Jamar was an energetic teenager with dreams of becoming a dancer. There are videos of him dancing to hip-hop at the age of 12 on Facebook. In 2010, he was placed in a Hats Off group home in one of the locations in Hamilton, Ontario. When Jamar got there, he claims he was prescribed to take 5 pills a day. Jamar rarely talked to a counselor or was seen by the psychiatrist. The only help that was offered to him was through medication. During the interview with Global News, Jamar intimidated the hundreds of times he was physically restrained to the ground and pinned up against the wall by staff. Jamar unfortunately tried to hang himself while he was in the group home. After being on medication for a while, enough time had passed where it would be affecting him. He became suicidal. As Jamar tried hanging himself, a staff member walked in and found him. The worker took him off the belt and hugged him. They both started crying. Although they're allegedly physically assaulted by staff, Jamar claims the staff also restrained kids mentally. He claims every child in the group home was medicated. Jamar is now 25, living in his apartment. He just finished working a 13-hour shift when he was being interviewed. He works in manual labor. Thank you for coming forward with your story. You were very brave, and I'm sorry you had to go through any of that. No child should be abused. Tishina Burnett was living with her family in a different province, and she was in and out of the foster care system there as well. She was told she was being moved back to Ontario abruptly. A social worker picked her up at the Pearson Airport in Mississauga and drove her to the Hats Off residence in Brantford, Ontario. Tishina was 12 years old when she arrived at Hats Off. She was there from 2012 to 2014. She claimed she was put on 4 to 5 different pills a day. She started feeling like she wasn't herself and experienced suicidal ideation and claimed to be depressed from all the pills she was on. Tishina felt like she was very, very over-medicated. She was prescribed to a pill called risperidone. Risperidone is an antipsychotic medication used to treat schizophrenia in adults and teenagers 13 years old or older. It is also used to treat episodes of mania in adults and teens and under 10 years old with bipolar. It also can be used as a short-term treatment for people who experience psychosis. Risperidone can also be used to treat behavioral problems with children who have autism. It is also used as a treatment for ADHD, OCD, aggression and behavior disorders, tics, and Tourette syndrome. Tishina was alarmed when a doctor working for Hats Off prescribed her this medication because she's never been diagnosed with any of those conditions. Months before Tishina was leaving the Hats Off group home, she was seen by a different physician that took her off most of the medication that she was taking and only prescribed her Prozac for anxiety and depression, which she still takes to this day. Tishina wished there would have been therapy and more coping techniques to deal with the frustrations of past and present trauma. She says it would have been really helpful. After years of working through trauma due to the Ontario child welfare system, Tanisha is now living in Ontario by herself. She has 2 jobs and she has a son and a baby on the way. She is also studying at Fleming College. Thank you for sharing your story. I couldn't imagine going through all that stuff that you had to go through. I'm glad you're in a better place in life and I hope you keep flourishing. The next victim is Dwayne Ferguson. Dwayne arrived to Canada when he was 6 years old. Due to Hurricane Ian, Dwayne had to leave his mother and brothers behind in Gronda. It was Dwayne's dream to be reunited with his mother and brother. Dwayne remained hopeful that they'd be able to be a family again one day. After arriving in Canada, Dwayne spent many years being moved around to different group homes and eventually was placed in the care of Hats Off. A former teacher came forward and said, "I remember him as gentle and a very curious young man. He wasn't a fan of his lunch that the Hats Off group gave him, and the teacher would often see him throwing it out in the garbage. The staff never listened, or they would say they didn't have anything else to give him." Dwayne and his friend were gifted jackets by a teacher for Christmas. She remembers them being so proud of the jackets. They made sure to take excellent care of them. The teacher knew they didn't get much over the holidays, so she wanted to make an impact on them. Dwayne had a trail of documents, including a secret draft report. Signs of concern points to Hats Off. Unfortunately, Dwayne was found dead behind the Hats Off group home where he lived in Hamilton, Ontario. Dwayne passed away from suicide in 2014. I am so sorry the system failed you, and I'm so sorry you never got to be reunited with your family. May you rest in peace. If you made it this far, I just want to say thanks, and there is going to be a part 2 coming up shortly after this one.